Hello and welcome to The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. On Sunday, Germans will elect the lower house of the federal parliament, the Bundestag, which will mark the end of Angela Merkel's 16 years in office. Although voting in person takes place on the day, postal voting has already begun. Some 60.4 million Germans over the age of 18 are eligible to vote. Which political parties are in contention? When will we know the results? One of Tunisia's powerful labour unions says that moves by President SAIED have sole control to amend the constitution are a danger to democracy. Called for dialogue. SAIED dismissed the Prime Minister, suspended Parliament and assumed executive power on the 25th of July in a move that his foes described as a coup. Are the democratic gains of Tunisia's 2011 revolution under threat? And rights groups and medical advocates say that Israeli raids are having a dire effect on the mental health of Palestinian children. Palestinian residents and human rights groups contend that Israel makes it almost impossible for Palestinians to get the required building permits, and that this Israeli policy is a deliberate plan to Judaize the eastern sector of the city. What legal steps can be taken to stop the atrocities? And these are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. Angela Merkel cultivated the image of a prudent and pragmatic leader and was once dubbed the Queen of Germany. Our following infographic gives an overview of her political career until she became the first female Chancellor in 2005. Just a few days left until Germans vote in the federal election on Sunday. The latest poll shows the gap narrowing between Conservative Armin Laschet and Social Democrat Olaf Scholz.
Germany, one of the most powerful countries on the European continent, is preparing for an election this Sunday. The three candidates hoping to succeed Angela Merkel as German Chancellor and the four leaders of the other parties currently in parliament clashed over a variety of topics in the last televised debate on Thursday. Unlike previous debates that repeatedly focused on climate change, poverty and other domestic topics, the candidates discussed foreign policy issues for the first time too.
Europe is looking at Germany and what government will be formed, because Germany is always an important country in Europe, which will, with its economic strength, keep Europe together and at the same time is a political power which many look to. That's why I think that we need to more sovereign and stronger Europe, especially in foreign and defense affairs.
Insbesondere in der Außen- und Sicherheitspolitik.
Müssen mit Frankreich zusammen
We have to make sure, together with France, that Europe progresses, and that is why we have a very tight partnership, which I think is very important. Myself and the entire government can understand France's irritation about the arms deal that the United States and Great Britain have started. We have to make sure that we get a strong and sovereign Europe.
At the beginning of the year, a new US administration was voted, which finally gave a new star for democracy worldwide. What was the first reaction from the government and Grand Coalition to start an investment program with China, which was also a slap in the face of our European partners because it was not decided together in Europe.
Armand Laschet's conservative bloc is trailing the Social Democrats in polls. The INSA poll put the SPD on 25%, stable from a week ago and at their highest rating since June 2017. The Conservatives added half a percentage point to come in at 22%, and the Greens were at 15%. Current polls leave room for several coalition scenarios, giving the Liberal Free Democrats a potential kingmaker role in upcoming coalition talks.
We need Nord Stream 2 project, because if we exit from all energy types, we obviously need gas in the coming years. What's important to me is that what the German government agreed on is now being implemented, and that's a geopolitical guarantee that Ukraine suffers no disadvantages. Should Russia question this, the project will immediately be stopped.
We have international obligations which we must fulfill, which means there are no unilateral decisions from Germany.
I'm joined live from Berlin in Germany by Zafer Meshe, who's a political analyst and SETA Berlin coordinator. Zafer, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge.
You're welcome, Andy. Thanks for having me with you.
Now, Sunday marks the end of an era. So just before we talk about what we expect from these elections, let's just very briefly mention Angela Merkel, who's been leader of the CDU and leader of Germany for the last 16 years. What change will her absence make to the country, regardless of who wins on Sunday?
Well, talks about Angela Merkel will take more than some minutes, because she became a real global leader during the tenure of 16 years. And young voters cannot remember any other chancellor, you know. She is now 67 years old. And when we talk about Merkel's leadership, we can certainly state that during her tenure, Angela Merkel has left deep traces on German domestic and foreign policy in the tradition of her predecessors, Konrad Adenauer and Helmut Kohl. Just to bear in mind, Helmut Kohl and Adenauer roughly also had a ruling period of 17 years. So that means she will let her footprint on not only on German, on European, also on the global area. Mm-hmm. And to talk about her style of leadership, everybody knows she has been never a stirring speaker. She hardly exudes enthusiasm, but especially during times of crisis, she showed a mixture of pragmatism, assertiveness, and personal robustness. I mean, Merkel will leave the arena, of course, as you mentioned, and now we have to look ahead. So, there is more shadow than light, what we can say, with the general elections on Sunday, I suppose.
Right. And the interesting thing with, I think it's 47 parties standing on standing for the election on Sunday. There are a few forerunners, but interestingly, in spite of the very positive things you've been saying about Merkel, the CDU is losing ground slightly in the latest polls. Well, what are we expecting on Sunday? Who are the leading contenders?
I mean, you know, we recently discussed the issue. I mean, the rise of the Social Democrats is due to some miserable conceptual and strategy mistakes of both parties, of the Green Party and of the CDU. As you remember, several weeks ago, we had a discussion about who will be the first party, the Christian Democrats or the Green Party, and the scandals around Annalena Baerbock, the Chancellor's candidate. I don't want to go into details, and the really destructive and really bad process of the selection of the Chancellor's candidate within the Christian Union has damaged the reputation of the Christian Democrats. And all of a sudden, since 3-4 weeks, we witness the rise of the Social Democrats. So that's why we have a very narrow gap between the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. And the key criteria is, or the key issue is, what will happen with the roughly 35–40% of undecided voters. And that's why the running is still open. You know, we have a mistake, let's say an error, statistical error of up to 3%, what we see as the percentages of the parties. So when we see the recent polls, Christian Democrats 22, Social Democrats 25. That means with an error areal of 3%. So it is really a very interesting. It will be a very interesting general elections on Sunday. And I suppose, I mean, I'm not the only one, so that it will be very, very narrow and very, the gap will be minimal, and that's why we have roughly 60 million voters, and interestingly 1.4 or 1.3 voters with Turkish background. And,
I was going to ask you about the Turks. How is this election, the Turkish community in Germany, how are they looking forward to this?
Well, I think if they look at the parties, then they have two criteria. First, in terms of integration and inclusive society, where the people with migration background, also from Turkey, of course, are there still discriminated or not? Which party is for further the inclusiveness of people with migration background? And definitely we see there the cliche is the Green Party, the Social Democrats are quite good in that context. But with Laschet, we have a Chancellor's candidate of the Christian Union who is really very, very popular among the Turkish community. That's why, due to his work as an integration minister in the Bundesland, in the federal state of North Rhine-Westphalia, and he has very close contacts to Turkish NGOs and to the Turkish community. That's why it's not easy to forecast, but I think he will get strong support from the Turkish community, also due to the fact that he now gave some interviews to Turkish media outlets, and also met a lot of people from the Turkish background. The recent weeks, he visited a Turkish company, a German company, of course, founded by a Turkish businessman in Hesse, in another federal state. So he's someone who is very, very familiar, very well known, and has sympathies and has voters' support from the Turkish community, I would say.
Well, we know the German-Turkish community is very important. We shouldn't forget the...
Sorry. I'm sorry. The second criteria is, of course, the policy towards Turkey, and this is something where none of the parties are in favor of the Turkish community. There is one very a small party, the Todenhofer movement. Some have great sympathies with them because he is really aware of what's going on in Turkey and openly also criticizes the harsh critics from Germany, from German politicians in the German public. So he is popular, but none of the other established parties.
Well, we'll be watching on Sunday to follow the elections here from A News. And let's hope that for all those in Germany, whatever their backgrounds, that this is a successful election taking the country forward to a bright future. Thank you so much for joining us today, Zafer Meshe. Thank you. Disappointing results in the 2019 European elections confirmed the decline of both the CDU and its centre-left partner. Merkel's centre-right won, but with its worst ever national election performance, while the SPD came third behind the Greens. However, until she leaves, Merkel remains one of the longest-serving heads of the CDU and of modern Germany itself. We will, of course, keep you updated on the elections with a special programme on A News on Sunday. But for now, let's move to our next topic to speak about the political crisis in Tunisia. Tunisia's President Kais Saied had long been revered by the people of his country for his old-school style and communication with ordinary citizens. A stark change from the old political class. But who is Kais Saied? Our following infographic explains. Tunisian President Kais Saied has decided to abolish the body established in 2014 to monitor the constitutionality of laws and to assume the task of preparing amendments related to political reforms through a commission which he constituted himself.
Tunisian President Kais Saied is determined to rule the country by decree, ignoring parts of the constitution. Saied is preparing to change the political system, prompting immediate opposition from rivals. He has held nearly total power since the 25th of July, when he sacked the Prime Minister, suspended Parliament and assumed executive authority.
These exceptional measures will continue. Transitional provisions have been established and a Prime Minister will be appointed, but the transitional exceptional provisions will respond to your will.
His intervention undermined the democratic gains of Tunisia's 2011 revolution that ended autocratic rule and triggered the Arab Spring. As the weeks have passed, he has come under growing pressure from Tunisian political players and Western donors to name a prime minister and explain how he intends to move past the crisis. The new measures go far beyond the steps he took in July, writing into the official Gazette rules that transform Tunisia's political system to give the president almost unlimited power. Rules published in the official Gazette allow him to issue legislative texts by decree, appoint the cabinet, and set its policy direction and basic decisions without interference. SAIED did not put any time limit on his seizure of power, but said he would appoint a committee to help draft amendments to the 2014 constitution.
He announced that he will change the electoral law, and the importance of this does not stop at changing the formal aspects, but the aim of this change is to reduce the role of political parties and to rely on the election of individuals, which will result in a heterogeneous parliament.
I'm now joined live by Dr. Yusra Ghanouchi, who's the Ennahda Party's international spokesperson. Dr. Ghanouchi, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. It's back from the 25th of July that things began to change in Tunisia, I can say, but what's been the recent changes that has further upsets the political sphere in Tunisia, and what is happening on the ground in Tunisia right now?
Obviously, on the 25th of July, 2 weeks ago, the president announced exceptional measures which he based on an invalid interpretation of Article 80 of the Constitution, claiming that there was an imminent danger to Tunisia, justifying the exceptional measures. At the time, we and the majority of parties opposed these measures, which we saw as unconstitutional. What we have seen since then, and what was announced 2 days ago, is nothing short of a suspension of the Constitution and abolition of all legitimate democratic institutions in the country, leaving us with authoritarianism, really, a return to the very system of dictatorship, one-man rule that Tunisians rose against in 2011. So what we have now is no more pretense of working within the Constitution or an interpretation of the Constitution. We have a suspension of the majority of the Constitution and the promulgation of a so-called temporary organization of powers, a custom-made constitution that gives more or less all powers to one individual, that is Kais Saied. And that is a coup against democracy, against parliament, against all the gains that Tunisians have made over the last 10 years.
Let's just talk about that. In our infographic, we described President Said as loved for his old school style and his communication with ordinary people. Is this a correct analysis? And why do you think that he's changed?
Indeed, what the president was known for is this decency and closeness to ordinary people. However, what he has done, and he has expressed this disdain for democratic mechanisms in the past, and disdain for what he calls intermediary bodies, anything that comes between citizens and the president, that is political parties, civil society organizations, and he has a very ambiguous, very vague concept of direct democracy. It is his right to believe in any system he wishes to adopt. However, he was elected on the basis of the Tunisian constitution. He swore to uphold the constitution and to abide by it. And what we see him doing now is exploiting Tunisia's economic and health crisis to impose his view, the political system he wants, which is away from all these slogans. In the end, it is one-man authoritarian rule, which is the very same thing that Tunisians rejected and revolted against.
So if we are to describe this as we could call it, I guess, an administrative coup, what are the opposition parties able to do at this stage since he's taken all power into his own hands?
We have opposed these unconstitutional, illegal, illegitimate measures since the announcement of the 25th of July. and so did many political parties, as well as constitutional law experts and organizations. We have seen some political parties who were willing to give the president the benefit of the doubt and to see what he would do, whether he would really do as he was announcing, to use these exceptional measures to fight corruption and to end instability. However, what we have seen so far is only a consolidation of authoritarian rule, an attack on human rights and freedoms that have been fought for and for which Tunisians have sacrificed so much over decades. And this has pushed now almost all political parties and civil society organizations to stand against this suspension of the constitution, this abolition of all oversight institution, and this attempt to bring all powers in the hands of one man.
If I play devil's advocate here, and I really don't hold this view, but if I were to say that President SAIED is doing this in order to make a specific change for the benefit of the long-term democracy in Tunisia, has he promised a return to democracy, a return to democratic norms at any time in the near future, or has he just consolidated with this is the path he's going to follow henceforth?
This is unfortunately what we're seeing. Even if there are any shortcomings in our political system, even if there are any changes to be made to our constitution that was almost unanimously adopted by the elected representatives of the Tunisian people in 2014, there are mechanisms for doing so. According to the constitution, it can be changed, but not by closing parliament, by violating people's human rights and freedoms, but through dialogue, through working with everyone. Tunisia has gone through many crises during its transition to democracy over the last 10 years, but through the use of dialogue, inclusive dialogue, without excluding anyone, it has managed to maintain its revolution, maintain its democratic transition, and achieve many successes, particularly on the political level. However, unfortunately, the president is refusing a dialogue, refusing to engage with anyone, including his own supporters, including the parties that had been supporting him before the 25th of July and after the 25th of July. He is not listening to anyone. And this is not the way forward. This will not solve any of our problems. We need everyone to come together, to engage in dialogue in order to be able to focus on the real problems of Tunisia, the economy, the pandemic, and these which should be the priorities of all politicians.
Absolutely. Now, 2 months have passed since this ball started rolling. Tunisians appear until now to have been very patient.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Have we lost
hello?
the sound? Hello?
Yes.
You can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, great. Internet plays fun and games with us sometimes. It's been 2 months since all of this started. The Tunisians appear to have been, until now, fairly patient. What do you see the way forwards from here? Will there be protests? Will there be a groundswell from the public? What will happen from here?
As you know, when the president announced these unconstitutional measures on the 25th of July, there were protests both in support and in opposition. And there was a protest in front of the assembly. However, at the time, the Speaker of Parliament, who is the president of another party, called on people to go back home, to avoid any clashes, and to give a chance to dialogue, to solve the problem and be able to bring Tunisia out of the crisis. However, the president has continued to refuse dialogue with anyone. We continue to call for dialogue. We believe it is the only way forward. We are working with other parties. We are open to work with everyone. We are trying to build as broad a front as possible to oppose these measures, to continue calling for restoring Tunisia's democracy. And we hope that the president will listen. If not, Tunisians have done this before. They have fought dictatorship before, and we are willing to do so again. We will not abandon the hard-won freedoms that Tunisians have made.
Well, we certainly hope that that this is a peaceful way forward from here on, and a very rapid return to democratic norms. Dr. Yusra Ghanouchi, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. Thank you. Our first protest against SAIED since his intervention on the 25th of July took place last week. Another has been called for Saturday, but no party has yet backed it. The President's declaration on Wednesday set out the framework within which he says he will rule during an undefined period of exceptional measures while he prepares a new constitution with help from a hand-picked committee. The coming days will show if the political crisis intensifies. For now, let's move on to our final topic to discuss the plight of Palestinians. Israeli forces bring destruction not only to Gaza but also to the hearts of Palestinian families as it continues its deadly air campaigns. Our following infographic explains the plight of Gaza's children. Studies show that almost 90% of children in the Gaza Strip have suffered from personal trauma, with virtually no access to mental health care or support.
Airstrikes, ongoing atrocity, torture, detention and the risk of demolition by Israeli forces have affected Palestinian children, not only causing trauma but also violating their right to a safe and secure childhood. In the occupied West Bank, thousands of families are living under the threat of house demolitions, and children go to school not knowing if they will return to their homes or to the debris of their memories. While in Gaza, children suffer from anemia, chronic malnutrition and stunted growth due to the ongoing besiege. During the last war, Israeli airstrikes killed at least 260 Palestinians and injured thousands. 66 children and 39 women were among those killed in the onslaught. A 2020 study published in the journal Frontiers in Psychiatry found that among Palestinian children and adolescents in the Gaza Strip, nearly 90% had experienced personal trauma and more than 80% had witnessed trauma to others. In Gaza, it is virtually impossible, experts say, for children to access mental health care. Palestinian children are deprived to live a normal life, like any child in the world, under the illegal occupation.
And now joined live from New York in the United States by Abed Awad, who's an attorney and Reuters Law School adjunct law professor, member of the board of directors of Palestine Legal. Abed, thank you so much for joining us here today on The Edge. This is a very disturbing and upsetting topic. We're going to talk about the children living in Palestine and particularly in Gaza that have been traumatized by not just the bombardments that we saw earlier this year and previously, but also by the general conditions that they're living in. Well, what can you give us a perspective on what children are experiencing in Palestine?
Well, first, it's very important to place this in its international legal context in human rights. Israel is a settler colonialist project, and the Israeli state is a occupying force. So in Gaza, in the West Bank, Israel is occupying Palestinian land and has control over the civilian population. So under international law, as an occupying force, they are prohibited under the Fourth Geneva Convention and the Hague Protocols. Let's say Article 51 prohibits them from terrorizing the civilian population. Article 49 prohibits them from displacing the indigenous civilian population and replacing them with others, or just simply deporting them from their indigenous homes. Article 33 prohibits the occupying forces from using collective punishment against Palestinians. Article 53 of the Geneva Convention also talks about prohibition of destroying the property of the civilian population. There's a duty on the occupying authority, the occupying force, to maintain status quo. They have a duty for safety, for society under occupation. The Convention on the Rights of Child provides that you're supposed to provide safety, education, health care, and preserve these children from trauma and from abuse. All of this and additional international customary law shows you that Israel is it's violating everything under international law, everything in the Fourth Geneva Convention. So what are the consequences? There are reasons why we create the Geneva Convention. There are reasons why we have international law, because there is something called that there are consequences when you prohibit, when you violate all of these. And what are those consequences? We're seeing them on the ground. As your reporter mentioned, in Frontier Psychiatry, a group of scholars had interviewed and investigated what is happening to Palestinian children and adolescents. In their report, The Traumatic Events and PTSD, almost 60% of Palestinian children and adolescents suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is all in violation of not only human rights and international law, but any human moral system. Mm-hmm. When you go to the Israeli occupied territories, there is 1 out of every 2 children has experienced a home demolition, where the Israelis simply inject or visit upon these civilian populations collective punishment. You'll have a political prisoner arrested. His entire family is collectively punished. His home is demolished. His livelihood is demolished. His children, his wife, his parents are becoming homeless. All of this is against international law. All of this is being observed and witnessed by young children. We know that children, all children, we're a product of our environment. We're a product of the experiences that we learn and
we appear to have some problems with our connection. I'm not sure if we can. Unfortunately, we've lost our connection there. The situation in the occupied Palestine is grave, with rights groups and medical advocates saying that Israeli raids did have a dire effect on the mental health of Palestinian children. Reports show that the grievous mental health repercussions of Israeli raids on Palestinian homes in the occupied West Bank, especially on children. There are many examples of the trauma that young people are suffering, not just, as we saw earlier this year, from bombardments into Gaza, from Israeli First World missiles landing on the territories, bombing residences and neighborhoods. making people, as Abed was just explaining to us, making them homeless. But also families are ripped out of their homes when they're invaded by Israeli forces to evict them. Their homes are demolished. A child might go to school one day wondering whether, when he returns, whether his home will still be there. And there are other issues as well, medical issues, whether or not children are getting the medical support that they need. As we saw in our report, there are very high levels of malnutrition. And the things that in the West we take for granted, the children in Berlin, as we were referring to earlier, in New York, in London, have rights to explore their dreams, explore their hopes. Children in Gaza have those ripped away from them. Sadly, the trauma continues. We'll continue to discuss it here on A News and on The Edge. It needs to change. Now, our analysts from around the world have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top stories shared with the hashtag German Election 2021. And here's what you've been saying about the 2021 German election on Twitter. Laura Jung says, 2 more days until the German election 2021. What's in for climate and health? German health professionals calling for change. And Munich International School says, in anticipation of the German elections this Sunday, students from 16 German classes simulated the elections in their own Waldorf polling station this week. And Andy Eckhardt says voters under the age of 30 make up approximately 14% of the electorate in the German election 2021. For many young Germans, Chancellor Angela Merkel is the only leader that they have known. Now let's take a look at our video today, which tells the ABC, or should I say the RBC, of the German elections.
Wahl 2021. Das Wahl-ABC. E wie Erststimme. Mit ihr wird der Direktbewerber in einem Wahlkreis gewählt. Gewählt ist der Kandidat, der die meisten Stimmen bekommen hat. Die siegreichen Direktkandidaten haben ihren Sitz im Parlament dann sicher. Z wie Zweitstimme. Sie ist noch wichtiger als die Erststimme. Denn mit der Zweitstimme für die Landeslisten der Parteien entscheiden die Wähler über die Zusammensetzung des Bundestages. Im Ergebnis werden dabei dann Direktmandate und Listmandate miteinander verrechnet. F wie 5%-Hürde. Sie soll für klare Verhältnisse im Bundestag sorgen. Denn nur Parteien, die bundesweit mindestens 5% der Zweitstimmen erhalten, werden bei der Verteilung der Sitze berücksichtigt. Alle anderen gehen leer aus. Ausnahme: gewinnt eine Partei mindestens 3 Direktmandate, dann zieht sie dennoch ins Parlament ein.
And now it's time for me to say Auf Wiedersehen for today. That's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boynes. Stay tuned as we'll be back next time with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.